Everywhere you look, people are pointing fingers. They blame their boss for their unhappiness, their parents for their limitations, their friends for their failures, and the world for being unfair. It's always someone else's fault. But what if that's the very reason they're not growing? What if the thing that's holding them back isn't life, but their refusal to take responsibility for it? The truth is, as long as you keep blaming others, you will always stay exactly where you are. Growth begins the moment you stop saying, "It's not my fault," and start asking, "What can I do differently?" This speech isn't about blaming yourself for everything that happens. It's about reclaiming your power. It's about understanding that while you can't control every circumstance, you can always control your response. When you blame, you give your power away. But when you take responsibility, you take that power back. You become the driver of your life instead of the passenger. You stop waiting for the world to change, and you start changing yourself. Because here's the truth. Blame feels good, but it keeps you blind. It protects your ego, but prevents your evolution. Responsibility, on the other hand, is uncomfortable. It's confronting. It's humbling. But it's also where transformation begins. The moment you choose to take accountability, you begin to see your pain differently. It stops being something that defines you and starts becoming something that refines you. This is a journey of ownership, of understanding that growth doesn't come from excuses, it comes from awareness. It's about seeing that the real power lies not in avoiding discomfort, but in embracing it. Not in playing the victim, but in taking responsibility. Because if it's always someone else's fault, you're not growing. But if you choose accountability, you turn every pain, every setback, and every mistake into progress. Taking responsibility is the first step toward growth, because it's the moment you stop living in denial and start owning your life. Most people spend years blaming circumstances, blaming others, blaming luck, or even blaming timing for their lack of progress. It feels easier that way. It's comforting to think that the world is unfair rather than admitting that maybe we didn't give our best effort. But here's the truth. The moment you place blame outside of yourself, you lose the power to change anything. Growth begins the second you realize that no matter what happened to you, it's still your responsibility to decide what happens next. When you take responsibility, you reclaim control over your story. You stop being a passenger and become the driver. Think about it. As long as you keep pointing fingers, you're waiting for someone else to fix your life. You're waiting for your boss to change, for your partner to understand, for the economy to improve, or for luck to finally show up at your door. But growth doesn't wait for better conditions. Growth happens when you decide to act despite the conditions. Taking responsibility doesn't mean everything that happened was your fault. It means you're willing to own your response to it. That's where real maturity begins. Responsibility is uncomfortable. It forces you to face truths you've avoided for years. It makes you ask hard questions. What choices did I make that led me here? What habits am I maintaining that hold me back? What mindset do I need to change? These questions aren't easy to answer because they expose the gap between who you are and who you want to be. But that discomfort is a sign of growth. When you take ownership of your situation, you stop wasting energy on excuses and start using it to build solutions. You stop defending your limitations and begin discovering your potential. The people who grow the most are not those who never make mistakes. They are the ones who take full responsibility when they do. They don't hide behind justifications or denial. They face reality head on. They understand that every setback is an opportunity to learn something about themselves. Responsibility transforms every failure into feedback. When something goes wrong, instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" they ask, "What can I learn from this?" That simple shift in mindset is the foundation of growth. Blame, on the other hand, keeps you small. It creates an illusion of safety. It tells you that you're not the problem, so you don't have to change. It lets you stay in your comfort zone, because if it's always someone else's fault, you don't have to face yourself. But that safety comes at a cost. It traps you in stagnation. You can't improve what you refuse to own. The more you blame, the more powerless you become. Every time you say, "It's not my fault," you give away a piece of your control. Taking responsibility is how you take that power back. It's not about self-blame or guilt. It's about empowerment. When you take responsibility, you stop waiting for the world to be different and start creating a different world for yourself. You recognize that your future depends on your choices today. You stop being reactive and become proactive. You begin to see challenges not as punishments, but as invitations to grow stronger. Every obstacle becomes a mirror reflecting who you are and what you need to improve. Look at any person who has achieved greatness, and you'll find someone who refused to play the victim. They took ownership of their dreams, their failures, and their growth. They didn't let excuses dictate their destiny. They understood that progress doesn't come from perfect circumstances. It comes from personal accountability. When something didn't work, they didn't complain. They adapted. When they failed, they analyzed. When they struggled, they stayed committed. That's the difference between people who grow and people who stay stuck. Taking responsibility changes how you view yourself. It builds self-respect because you know you're capable of handling life. It builds confidence because you realize you can influence outcomes through your actions. It builds discipline because you stop waiting for motivation and start taking consistent steps forward. Responsibility gives you a sense of internal control, a belief that no matter what happens, you can respond effectively. That's the mindset of growth. The journey toward growth is not about perfection, it's about ownership. You don't grow by pretending you have it all figured out. You grow by admitting when you don't and having the courage to do something about it. You grow when you stop running from accountability and start embracing it. Responsibility isn't a burden, it's freedom. It frees you from dependency on others for your happiness, success, and fulfillment. It allows you to shape your future intentionally instead of drifting through life accidentally. Every time you take responsibility, you move closer to becoming the person you were meant to be. You learn more, adapt faster, and recover stronger. You begin to see that growth is not something that happens to you. It's something you create. Responsibility is not the end of comfort. It's the beginning of transformation. It's the point where your excuses end and your evolution begins. It's the shift from helplessness to empowerment, from stagnation to progress, from living by chance to living by choice. Blame creates illusions because it allows us to distort reality in a way that protects our ego. It gives us a false sense of comfort by convincing us that we are not the problem, that the reason for our pain, failure, or frustration lies somewhere outside ourselves. It's an emotional defense mechanism, a way to avoid discomfort, guilt, or shame. But the cost of that comfort is awareness. When we choose blame, we sacrifice truth. We choose illusion over growth, and illusion keeps us stuck. Responsibility, on the other hand, demands honesty. It strips away the stories we tell ourselves and forces us to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be. And in that clarity, awareness is born. Blame feeds the narrative that life is happening to us. It paints us as victims of circumstance, people, or fate. It convinces us that we are powerless to change our outcomes because someone else always holds the keys. The moment we blame, we stop growing. We stop learning. Because when we blame, our focus shifts outward toward what others did wrong, instead of inward toward what we can improve. Awareness doesn't exist where blame thrives because awareness requires self-reflection. Blame says, they did this to me. Awareness asks, what part did I play in this? That single shift in question separates those who evolve from those who repeat the same mistakes. Blame keeps us blind to patterns. When we refuse to take responsibility, we repeat the same behaviors expecting different results. We change jobs but face the same conflicts. We end relationships but meet the same type of person. We abandon goals but find the same excuses. That's because we've never stopped long enough to look inward. We keep changing the environment instead of changing ourselves. Responsibility breaks this cycle. When you take responsibility, you start to notice your triggers, your habits, and your reactions. You begin to see connections between your actions and your outcomes. That awareness is what leads to growth. The illusion of blame is seductive because it feels easier than facing ourselves. It's easier to say, my boss doesn't appreciate me, than to admit, maybe I'm not communicating my value. It's easier to say, people are toxic, than to recognize, maybe I attract what I tolerate. It's easier to say, life isn't fair, than to confront, maybe I've been avoiding the hard work required. Blame provides emotional relief in the short term, but emotional paralysis in the long term. Responsibility, though uncomfortable, is liberating. It empowers you to change what you can control. your actions, your mindset, your attitude. Awareness begins where blame ends. The moment you stop assigning fault and start seeking understanding, your perspective widens. You begin to see how your thoughts shape your behavior and how your behavior shapes your reality. You become conscious of your choices instead of being controlled by them. Awareness brings light to areas of your life you've ignored, your fears, your insecurities, your patterns of avoidance. Responsibility is what fuels that awareness because it forces you to look at yourself honestly. You can't grow in the dark. You can only grow in truth, and truth begins with responsibility. Blame is the enemy of progress because it externalizes power. It tells you that success or failure depends on someone else's actions. It's like handing the steering wheel of your life to another person and then complaining about the direction you're headed. Responsibility hands the wheel back to you. It says, maybe I can't control everything that happens, but I can control how I respond to it. That's where awareness becomes transformation. When you stop reacting and start choosing. When you stop blaming and start observing. When you stop deflecting and start learning. Every time you blame, you reinforce a lie that life is unfairly targeting you. Every time you take responsibility, you reinforce a truth that you are capable of change. The choice between blame and responsibility is the choice between illusion and awareness. Illusion keeps you trapped in emotional patterns you don't even recognize. Awareness opens your eyes to the reality that your mindset determines your outcomes. Blame creates emotional fog, responsibility clears it. Blame leads to confusion, responsibility leads to clarity. Think of awareness as a mirror. Responsibility forces you to stand in front of that mirror and look closely. At first, it's uncomfortable. You'll see the parts of yourself you don't like, the pride, the fear, the laziness, the inconsistency. Blame allows you to look away and pretend the mirror is wrong. Responsibility makes you stay there and look deeper. And the longer you look, the clearer the reflection becomes. You start to understand yourself, your strengths, your flaws, your patterns, your power. That understanding is awareness, and awareness is the foundation of all personal evolution. People who blame never experience deep growth because they never develop self-awareness. They stay trapped in surface, level thinking. They talk about what others did wrong, but never explore why they reacted the way they did. They repeat cycles of frustration because they lack the courage to face themselves. Responsibility requires courage. It's not for the weak-hearted. It asks you to stand in the discomfort of truth and choose to grow from it. It asks you to own your part, even when it's painful. Because awareness always demands vulnerability before it rewards you with growth. When you start living from a place of responsibility, you begin to see the world differently. You stop wasting time trying to change people and start investing time in changing yourself. You stop expecting others to make things right and start finding ways to make things better. You stop defending your ego and start developing your character. Responsibility is not about taking the blame for everything. It's about seeing clearly how your actions, words, and mindset influence your reality. Awareness is not about judging yourself, it's about understanding yourself. And understanding is the birthplace of transformation. Growth requires discomfort and self-honesty because transformation never happens in the space where you feel safe, certain, and unchallenged. It happens in the moments when life pushes you to confront who you really are, not who you pretend to be. Discomfort is the birthplace of change, and self-honesty is the mirror that reflects the truth about what needs to change. Most people say they want to grow, but what they actually mean is that they want improvement without pain, progress without struggle, and success without sacrifice. But growth doesn't work like that. Real growth demands that you step into the unknown, face your fears, and tell yourself the truth, even when it hurts. Discomfort is not your enemy, it's your greatest teacher. Every time you step outside your comfort zone, you expose yourself to uncertainty, and that uncertainty forces you to adapt, learn, and evolve. Growth doesn't come from repetition. It comes from resistance. Just like muscles grow through tension and stress, your character, mindset, and resilience grow through struggle and discomfort. When life challenges you, when things don't go your way, when you feel lost or uncomfortable, that's not a sign that you're failing. That's a sign that you're evolving. You are being stretched beyond who you were, and that stretch is what shapes who you can become. Most people run from discomfort because they associate it with pain or failure. They choose the illusion of comfort over the opportunity of growth. They stay in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, and habits that destroy them simply because it feels familiar. But comfort can be a trap. It's a silent killer of potential. It gives you the illusion of peace while slowly robbing you of progress. Growth only happens when you have the courage to sit in discomfort long enough to learn what it's trying to teach you. Every challenge, every frustration, every setback is trying to show you something about yourself, your limits, your fears, your strengths, your blind spots. Self-honesty is what allows you to interpret those lessons. You cannot grow if you are lying to yourself. You cannot evolve if you refuse to face your weaknesses. Self-honesty is one of the hardest disciplines because it requires humility. It asks you to admit that you are not as disciplined as you think, not as focused as you claim, not as open-minded as you portray. It asks you to stop hiding behind excuses and to confront your own patterns of avoidance. Most people don't lack opportunity. They lack honesty. They tell themselves stories like, I don't have time, I'm just unlucky, or I'm not ready. When deep down, they know those are just ways to avoid discomfort. Growth begins the moment you stop lying to yourself and start taking full ownership of your truth. Discomfort and self-honesty work together. Discomfort reveals your limits. Self-honesty helps you acknowledge them. Discomfort exposes your weaknesses. Self-honesty allows you to improve them. Discomfort tests your patience. And self-honesty helps you recognize how you react under pressure. Every time you face discomfort with honesty, you grow stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. The people who grow the most are not the ones who have it easy. They are the ones who have learned to be brutally honest with themselves while enduring the pain of change. Growth doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. It comes from admitting when it's not. It comes from looking at your results and accepting that they reflect your actions, not your intentions. It comes from realizing that the gap between who you are and who you want to be can only be closed through effort, discipline, and truth. Self-honesty allows you to see the reality of where you stand. Discomfort gives you the motivation to move beyond it. Together, they form the foundation of lasting growth. Think about every breakthrough you've had in life. It didn't happen during easy times. It happened when you were frustrated, uncertain, or in pain. It happened when you questioned yourself, when you doubted everything, when you felt stuck. But instead of running away, you faced it. That discomfort forced you to grow. You discovered parts of yourself you didn't know existed. You found strength you didn't think you had. You gained perspective you couldn't have learned from comfort. That's the paradox of growth. The very thing you avoid is the thing you need most. Self-honesty is the internal compass that keeps your growth aligned with reality. Without it, you might work hard, but in the wrong direction. You might convince yourself that you're growing when you're simply staying busy. You might mistake movement for progress. Self-honesty keeps you grounded. It helps you ask questions like, am I really putting in the effort I could? Am I facing my fears or avoiding them? Am I seeking growth or validation? Those questions are uncomfortable because they expose your truth, but that exposure is necessary. You can't heal what you hide, and you can't change what you won't admit. Every time you choose discomfort over ease and honesty over ego, you take another step toward becoming your best self. You start to see that the pain of growth is far less than the regret of staying the same. You realize that comfort might make you feel safe, but it won't make you fulfilled. Growth requires courage. The courage to be uncomfortable, the courage to be honest, and the courage to confront yourself. Because until you face who you are with complete honesty, you can never become who you're meant to be. A victim mindset destroys potential because it convinces you that life is something that happens to you, not something you create. It teaches you to see yourself as powerless, helpless, and at the mercy of circumstances, people, or fate. When you carry a victim mentality, you give away the most valuable thing you possess, your power to choose. You trade responsibility for resentment, accountability for excuses, and action for complaint. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop living with intention and start existing in reaction. Growth, success, and fulfillment become impossible because they all require ownership. And ownership cannot exist where victimhood lives. The victim mindset is seductive because it feels safe. It offers emotional comfort by placing blame elsewhere. It allows you to protect your ego by saying, it's not my fault. When something goes wrong, you tell yourself the world is unfair. When you fail, You tell yourself that life is too hard. When others succeed, you tell yourself they got lucky. It's easier to believe these stories than to face the possibility that your own decisions, habits, or mindset might be part of the problem. But the truth is, as long as you keep telling yourself these stories, you remain stuck in the same place. The victim mindset doesn't just hold you back, it chains you to mediocrity. People with a victim mindset often confuse sympathy for strength. They rely on others to validate their pain instead of learning from it. They want to be rescued, not to rise. But every time you wait for someone to save you, you reinforce the belief that you can't save yourself. That belief kills potential. It shuts down creativity, resourcefulness, and perseverance. It stops you from taking initiative. The more you repeat the story that life is unfair, the less capable you feel of changing it. And over time, you start to accept limitations that were never truly real, only imagined, only believed. The danger of a victim mindset is that it becomes your identity. You begin to define yourself by your struggles instead of your strength. You start introducing yourself to life through your pain. You start saying things like, people always take advantage of me, or nothing ever works out for me. And the more you say it, the more you believe it. That belief becomes your reality because your mind always finds evidence to support what it believes. When you see yourself as a victim, you act like one, and when you act like one, you attract experiences that reinforce that narrative. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, not because life is against you, but because you've convinced yourself that it is. To destroy potential, the victim mindset doesn't need to take everything from you. It just needs to take one thing, your belief in your ability to change. Once that's gone, everything else crumbles. You stop setting goals because you think it won't matter. You stop trying because you think the odds are rigged. You stop dreaming because you think dreams are for people luckier than you. But growth, success, and transformation don't happen to lucky people. They happen to those who take responsibility even when it's hard. They happen to those who choose to rise instead of complain. They happen to those who stop blaming the world and start building themselves. Escaping a victim mindset begins with awareness. It starts with recognizing how often you use blame as a shield. Every time you say, I can't because of them, you surrender control. Every time you say, it's not my fault, you reject an opportunity to grow. The more you externalize your problems, the more you internalize helplessness. Awareness allows you to see that while you can't control everything that happens, you can always control how you respond. That's where freedom begins, in your response. When you choose to respond with ownership instead of blame, you reclaim your power. The victim mindset thrives in comparison. You look at others' success and tell yourself they had it easier. You compare your struggles to their highlights and use that as justification for your own inaction. But comparison blinds you to your own potential. It keeps you focused on what others have instead of what you can create. People who grow don't waste energy wishing for a different hand. They learn how to play the one they were dealt. The moment you stop comparing and start creating, you stop being a victim of life and start becoming the author of it. Another way the victim mindset destroys potential is by killing gratitude. When you constantly feel like the world owes you something, you stop seeing what you already have. Gratitude turns into entitlement, and entitlement kills drive. You start to believe that because you've suffered, the world should reward you. But life doesn't work that way. Life doesn't give you what you think you deserve. It gives you what you work for. The victim mindset blinds you to this truth and keeps you stuck in the illusion that someone else controls your happiness. Growth requires self-awareness, responsibility, and courage. Qualities that cannot coexist with victimhood. You cannot grow if you're waiting for someone else to make it easier. You cannot evolve if your identity depends on feeling wronged. And you cannot unlock your potential while clinging to excuses. The moment you stop playing the victim and start taking ownership, everything changes. You begin to see obstacles as opportunities, not enemies. You start to realize that life isn't happening to you. It's responding to you. The victim mindset says, I can't. Responsibility says, I will. One destroys potential, the other awakens it. One keeps you powerless, the other sets you free. Accountability turns pain into progress because it transforms suffering from something meaningless into something purposeful. Everyone experiences pain, failure, loss, rejection, disappointment. But what separates those who grow from those who stay stuck is how they deal with it. Pain by itself doesn't create growth. It's what you do with that pain that matters. When you run from it, ignore it, or blame others for it, pain becomes a cycle that repeats itself when you take accountability for it. When you face it, learn from it, and own your part in it, that same pain becomes fuel for transformation. Accountability is the bridge between what hurts and what heals, between falling apart and rising stronger. Taking accountability doesn't mean taking all the blame. It means recognizing your role in what happened and asking, what can I do differently next time? It's about shifting your focus from what went wrong to what you can learn. Pain becomes progress the moment you take ownership of your reaction to it. You can't always control the cause of your pain, but you can always control your response. Accountability gives you that control. It turns you from a passive sufferer into an active learner. Every setback becomes a lesson. Every failure becomes data. Every challenge becomes a stepping stone toward resilience. Without accountability, pain festers. It becomes resentment, bitterness, and victimhood. You replay the same events in your mind, searching for who to blame, hoping that understanding why something happened will somehow make it hurt less. But blame doesn't heal, it only postpones healing. Accountability, on the other hand, accelerates it. When you own your part, you stop wasting energy on excuses and start channeling it into change. You stop asking, why me? And start asking, what can I learn from this? That shift in perspective turns pain into purpose. Pain has a way of revealing truth. It exposes what's not working, your habits, your mindset, your boundaries. Accountability helps you see those truths clearly. When something hurts, it's life's way of showing you that something within you needs to grow. But growth only happens when you face that pain honestly. Accountability forces you to look at the root of the problem, not just the symptoms. It makes you evaluate your decisions, your patterns, and your behavior. It requires humility, the willingness to admit that maybe you played a part in your own struggle. That realization is uncomfortable, but it's also liberating. Because once you recognize your role, you can change it. You can adjust, evolve, and become stronger. When you take accountability, you give meaning to your pain. It's no longer something that happened to you, it's something that happened for you. Every painful experience becomes a teacher. The rejection that broke your heart teaches you self-worth. The failure that embarrassed you teaches you perseverance. The mistake that cost you something important teaches you wisdom. Accountability turns pain into progress by transforming regret into reflection and reflection into growth. The more responsibility you take, the more control you gain over your own evolution. Pain without accountability is chaos. It keeps you trapped in the same emotional cycles because you never extract the lesson. You keep repeating the same mistakes, facing the same challenges, and feeling the same frustration. Accountability breaks that loop. It forces you to analyze instead of agonize. It helps you identify the patterns that hold you back, the habits you need to change, the attitudes you need to let go of, the boundaries you need to set. It gives you clarity, and clarity creates direction. That direction turns pain into momentum, and momentum turns into progress. Accountability also builds emotional strength. It teaches you to take ownership of your emotions instead of being controlled by them. When something painful happens, accountability reminds you that you can feel your feelings without letting them dictate your actions. You learn to process pain productively instead of destructively. You stop using pain as an excuse to quit and start using it as a reason to grow. This emotional discipline becomes one of your greatest assets. It allows you to stay grounded during chaos, focused during failure, and humble during success. People who take accountability don't see pain as punishment. They see it as preparation. They understand that every challenge is shaping them for something greater. Accountability keeps them from giving up too soon because they know that growth takes time. They use their pain as feedback, not to prove that they're unworthy, but to prove that they're capable of evolving. They reflect, adjust, and move forward with more awareness. This mindset creates progress not just externally, but internally. You start to notice your reactions improving, your patience growing, and your resilience deepening. You begin to trust yourself because you know you can handle what life throws at you. Accountability also strengthens relationships. When you take ownership of your actions, you build trust. People respect those who can admit their mistakes and learn from them. Blame destroys connection, accountability deepens it. It turns conflict into communication and misunderstanding into mutual growth. The ability to say, I was wrong, or I could have handled that better, requires humility and courage, and those qualities inspire confidence in others. Pain becomes a shared opportunity for progress, not a source of division. At its core, accountability is a mindset of ownership, a refusal to let pain define you or limit you. It's the understanding that while you can't always choose your struggles, you can always choose how you respond to them. And in that choice lies your growth. Every time you face pain with accountability, you become more resilient, more aware, and more capable. You start to see that life isn't about avoiding pain, but about transforming it into something valuable. Accountability gives you the power to do that. It turns your wounds into wisdom, your mistakes into lessons, and your suffering into strength. Growth doesn't come from perfection. It comes from ownership. It comes from those quiet moments when you stop blaming the world and finally admit, this is on me. That's where real power begins. Because as long as you're blaming others, you're handing them control of your life. But when you take responsibility, you take that control back. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you, and you start rescuing yourself. You stop chasing validation, and you start building strength from within. The truth is, life will always give you reasons to point fingers. Unfair situations, difficult people, unexpected setbacks. But every time you choose to rise above blame, you rise above your old self. You turn every pain into purpose, every challenge into growth, and every obstacle into opportunity. Responsibility isn't a burden, it's freedom. It's the moment you decide that no matter what happens, you will lead your life forward with awareness and integrity. Because the person who blames stays stuck. The person who owns their life evolves. The one who points fingers stays trapped in the past, but the one who accepts accountability shapes the future. Growth doesn't happen when everything goes right. It happens when you take what went wrong and use it to become wiser, stronger, and more self-aware. So if it's always someone else's fault, you're not growing. But when you finally look in the mirror and say, it starts and ends with me, that's when everything changes. That's when you stop surviving and start evolving. That's when your pain transforms into progress and your responsibility becomes your greatest power.